Hello YouTube! Today I'm going to be eating some much needed humble pie. It has become a trend for influencers to start to believe that they can never be wrong because they have a big audience. To the point that sometimes you see them switch stances or go against what they used to say without ever actually coming out publicly to switch their stance because they are so deathly afraid of being perceived as wrong that they would rather lie to their audience in order to not lose that God status. And I think that's actually horrible because it's putting the idea in people's heads that you're not allowed to make mistakes, and that if you do make mistakes, you have to hide them from everyone else. I don't like that one bit because it projects a false sense of omniscience and it teaches young lifters a horrible lesson where instead of learning from their mistakes, people double down or they refuse to face their flaws because they think that this in itself is a bad thing. But I disagree with that. I think that it's only wrong to be wrong when you refuse to accept that you are. That's the only moment where it's an actual problem. So, our role, my role as an educator, is to show you, the audience, that there is more to learn in defeat and mistakes than in victory. And that blind spots, like the ones I'm going to be discussing today, my blind spots, are in reality growth areas. This is where you can become a better person, and this is where you can improve. So, we are going today to cover 5 lifts that I was dead wrong about. The stupidity that I spouted, and all of the things that I might have told you that led you down the wrong path. We're correcting all of that today, and I'm actually going to try and use that video as a way to make you realize how much I could learn from those very mistakes when I finally admitted that they were indeed mistakes. So let's start with the first lift on my list, which is the weighted dips. So I never actually directly told you guys that the weighted dip was a bad lift, but if you look at my programs, you rarely find that movement in there. It's not an horizontal press that is often present because I was biased against them. I believe, due to my own experience with the movement, that it was inherently dangerous, that shoulders were just not meant to do that movement. So I always prescribed it with like AMRAPs, but I never really got people to load the movement with low reps because I thought that it was just plainly horrible for hypertrophy. And this turns out was actually completely fucking wrong because on my own journey, I started to work more and more towards building up my dips capacity and endurance, and I found out that actually, unless you have horrible shoulder mobility like I used to have, you can indeed do dips without pain at all, even with really deep ranges of motions. So instead of blaming the movement, how about blaming the issue that prevents you from doing the movement, namely the lack of mobility? It would be a different story if you are a youngin with sternum pain because you're not fully formed yet. I'm not telling you to push through that. But if you're like me, a fully formed adult, and you struggle with dips, this is an area of growth for you. Do not turn your back on it. Do not double down on bench press because eventually that shoulder injury will occur on the bench. It was never going to be caused by the dips. The dips could have saved you from that, which is something I realized because now I do my weighted dips and it's the one lift that causes me the least discomfort. So when I see people say, oh yeah, don't do dips, they're inherently bad. Where is this coming from? I think it's coming from their own inadequacy. So if you want an amazing torso builder for triceps, for chest, and for shoulders, give weighted dips a shot. Treat them seriously and with respect, ease into them. But I guarantee you that if there's one lift, one upper body lift that deserves the term and the name squat of the upper body, it's the dip. To the point that I think that if more people, let's say even 50% of all people who started with bench did dips instead as novices, we would see much better physiques. And I would even go as far as to say we would see less injuries because the dips will humble you. It's very easy to get hurt on bench press because you think the lift is safe, and it is if you know what you're doing. With the dips, you're like hanging, your arms are fully straight, you're moving your own body weight, There's that voice in your head that says, hey, don't ego lift and don't be a dickhead. And if you listen to that voice, you will be perfectly fine. So that was my first mistake. Weighted dips are actually fucking amazing. They're S tier all throughout. Then lift number 2, the GM press. I keep saying GM press. It's actually JM press. No, it's actually GM press. I'm even wrong when I'm not wrong. Jesus. All right, so this lift in particular, I also never told you was bad, but I also never programmed it because I thought it was bad. I was actually never forefront with my opinion. And if you look at my triceps tier list, I think I gave it like an A tier. In reality, it's S tier. It's an amazing triceps builder. And I was biased against it for aesthetic reasons. Because looking at it, I had never done the lift before, or like once or twice, but never seriously enough. But just looking at it, I thought, oh, it looks bad. It looks bad. How could a lift even look bad? It makes no sense. But I was deeply biased against it because to me it was just a skull crusher. It looked like a skull crusher, and since skull crushers were A tier, that was also A tier. But I was dead wrong. And anyone who has done GM presses knows why. It's because it feels nothing like a skull crusher. Properly done, the GM press is a press. It's in the name. It shouldn't be a surprise. But it feels like a press. It feels like you're pressing, but only with your tricep. So it's like if you took a close grip bench, you remove all shoulder involvement, all chest involvement, and now the only muscle that is allowed to move that fucking weight is the tricep. Well, duh, it's going to be absolutely amazing. And on top of that, it's super easy on the tendons. I always had this idea in my head that, oh, you have to have like super solid elbows to do GM press. It's actually the opposite. The stacked position of the elbow, where you press above your head like this, if you touch at neck level or nose level, that's super safe. It feels amazing on the elbows. It's actually the other way around. The GM press is a tendon builder and it's a tendon rehabber. I personally cured my tendonitis with GM presses. So, again, goes to show that you should never actually judge a lift by the cover. And here I have to give a shout out to Todd Hutchings, who some of you might know. He is an amazing arm wrestler. He's the guy who put me onto GM presses because he kept, in every seminar that he uploaded on YouTube, kept telling people, hey, you have elbow pain, do GM press. Do them with like wide grip, close grip, do them and you'll find that your elbow pain and your tricep growth is going to explode. I trust the guy because I respect him greatly. And so I did, and wow, what a revolution in my training. I now do 2 variations of the GM press, one with the SSB, which is built for it. If you have an SSB, you remove the handles, you press with that thing, it feels like it was meant to be. That's what that bar was created to do, not squats. And then the Smith machine, I have never been able to grind harder on the tricep isolation movement more than with the Smith machine GM press. No pain whatsoever, and you can push, you can really press. You feel a portion of the tricep I've never really felt before on any other movement, and it's the only real tricep movement where I can actually go to failure. Like I can get to a point where it's the triceps that fell and not something else. So again, I deeply, deeply recommend that you try that movement if you haven't yet. Now, number 3, heel elevation. In my head, elevating your heel on the squat was for people with poor mobility. And the reason why I thought that was because of a stupid meme. A meme that you might have seen because it was very popular in the past, but in lifting circles, it was the slab squat meme. So if you want to spot someone who's like a noob, you look at the person who's not able to do a full squat without raising their heels, which naturally in my head derived into, oh, so any tendency or attempt at elevating the heel must be bad. Well, no, it's bad in the case of a free squat because good luck squatting a lot of weight on your tippy toes. Your heels are supposed to stabilize the leg, so it's possible to do a bodyweight squat like this, but the second you have a weight on your back, it becomes a hazard. The problem is that you don't have to do it by yourself. You can just put something underneath your heel and suddenly the heel actually touches the ground and it's also elevated at the same time. So there is no reason not to elevate your heel unless you had what I had, which was an elitist powerlifting mindset. Even recently, just a year ago, As I was on my crusade against the powerlifting dogma, I was also part of it because I believed, oh, if you can't squat with a straight bar, high bar, then you're not really squatting. What nonsense is this? But you still hear it a lot in certain circles, where you'll have people who will tell you that you have to do things a certain way, and if you cannot or refuse, then you're not actually doing the thing. It's one, incredibly childish. Two, what benefit is there for the community in saying that? You just reinforce their own inadequacies and inability to think critically. Instead, how about we actually look at what heel elevation does? Heel elevation removes the need for ankle mobility. Why is that a bad thing? Again, for people who don't have the build, for people who are working towards it, it's absolutely fine with removing a limiting factor in order to actually be able to train properly. And the same goes for stuff like the Smith machine. The Smith machine is the same. It removes the need for stability, which allows you to hit certain muscles harder. It doesn't mean that stability is useless. It means that for a lot of people, it's great to use a mean to not be limited by something that is not muscular failure. And I have actually a test for you. It's what I call the Smith machine test. If you want to know if an influencer is worth trusting or if they're just a dogmatic pig, simple. Ask them, hey, what do you think about the Smith machine? If they tell you, oh, it's not for real men, you lift free weights, bro, click unsubscribe and go find someone else to listen to. Because that guy is going to give you horrible advice. In his next breath, he's going to tell you, oh, if you do a back movement with straps, it doesn't count. There's no logic in this. The straps don't magically make the back disconnected or add 1,000 pounds. Actually, it's the opposite. You get to use more back musculature by using the straps. Likewise, you get to activate more muscles by removing the need for stabilization. But the only thing to understand that is to have a brain, one, and two, actually try these things. And I speak as someone who, until very recently, did not understand that even someone like me, who could squat ass to grass without heel elevation, benefits from heel elevation. Because what happens when you're here instead of here is that now your knees can travel forward with much more ease because you're not limited by your hamstrings running into your calves because now the knees are pushed forward. So it is simply a hack to access deeper ranges of motion that you cannot access otherwise. I am literally limited. When I go ass to grass on the squat at some point, my hamstrings run into my body, they run into my calves. I cannot go any deeper, but my calves and my quads, and my knees have the ability to go deeper if only I give them a slight elevation. So now, this is what I do, because why wouldn't I do it? I've always found with squats that I was limited, but never by my quads. I never thought my quads going to failure. Now I do. Now, every single squat pattern I do turns into a pure quad movement. And if you're a bodybuilder, that's what you want. You want to be able to go to failure on the target muscle. So 80% of my total squat volume now is done with elevation and various degrees too. So I use 20 degrees elevation, upwards of 45 degrees. That's like this. It's super steep. I can use, what do I use with this? I use 80-pound dumbbells. 80-pound dumbbells for sets of 15. On that elevation, it feels like my quads are going to tear off. On 20 degree elevation, I use 345 for sets of 8 on the SSB. I've never felt my quads like this on squats, even with 4 plates. Why wouldn't I use less weight to get better results? That is the logic that is applied here. That is what my stupidity used to prevent me from doing. So I highly recommend that you try this because I firmly believe that squats are great for hypertrophy if you actually use that method. If you apply different degrees of incline, you can literally run a plethora of variations, never get injured, get less strain on the lower back, get more effective range of motion, which is what we want as bodybuilders, and also get a better stimulus to fatigue ratio, which is also always good. You want to get as much growth as possible from as little fatigue as possible. And that only takes not being a dum-dum. I used to be a dum-dum. I thought heel elevation was bad. It wasn't hardcore. It was me who wasn't hardcore because actually it's much harder to squat with your heels like this. Number 4, side twists. A small little lift that I always thought was complete garbage. In my abs tier list, I told you it was a bad movement because it lacked effective range of motion. which is true because the way I was doing them was complete bullshit. When I did side twists, I refused to actually let my body bend all the way on one side because I thought it was bad, because I believed in my head it was dangerous. Why? Because, and here, see again how it's interesting to go down the path of reasoning of someone who was wrong, because it's not enough to know that you're wrong. It's always good to be able to know why you are wrong. That way you can never make that mistake again. So past NH thought that if the spine bent on the side, it was dangerous. But I was perfectly fine with bending in front of me, in bending forward. So it was completely illogical, right? The spine's function is to bend, and it's also to bend to the side. So if you load that function, that's fine. There are muscles on your core that are there for this, in your back that are there for this. So side twists aren't bad, and you can actually go super deep in the range of motion, which, surprise, surprise, is something I realized when I actually did the lift. Do the lift. Before you criticize one, train one for at least 3 months, seriously, and tell me afterwards if it's still bad. I found out that I feel it in the entirety of my core. It's not just an oblique builder. If you go all the way into the range of motion on both sides, you feel the entire abs and the core scream in agony, and that's coming from someone who has very developed abs. So I changed my mind completely on it. It's actually an amazing oblique builder as long as you actually bend. And naturally, you want to do it one side at a time. Don't be the guy that has 2 dumbbells and who just does this weird penguin motions. That won't do much because it's going to limit range of motion. You really want to bend into it, lean into it. And if possible, don't do it with fixed dumbbells. For once, the rotating collars on the Olympic dumbbells actually work in your favor because now the plates can rotate. So instead of just dragging across your body, they can just turn like wheels, which makes the movement much, much smoother. And you don't even have to stop at doing it standing like this. You can make it harder by elevating one side of the body on a bench, which makes the other side of the core work even harder. So now you don't have to use much weight at all. Again, get as much result as possible from as little weight as possible. You can even do it on the hyperextension bench, which is something that I've said in my tier list, where now the legs are out of the equation and the bend is maximized. But regardless, a side twist is S tier. And I'm going to start programming it much more in the multiple free programs I'm going to make for you guys because it's just perfect. There's almost no fatigue outside of the core. I really was an idiot. It's always great to see how you improve as an adult year after year. And that leads us to lift number 5, which if you've clicked on this video, you must have clicked expecting or hoping that it was going to be included. And this is finally that moment where I heat my words, I take a big slice of humble pie, and I admit that yes, I was absolutely wrong about incline curls. Incline curls are actually an amazing bicep exercise, and I was full of shit. I admit it, I was full of shit, which is so funny because if you remember, I made a full video explaining step by step why the incline curl was a bad lift and why you should stop doing it. And if you want to access it, it's in the description. I'm not going to delete that video. That is going to stand as a testimony of my stupidity. But funnily enough, I still stand by most of the arguments that I present in the video. My arguments were not wrong. The only thing that is wrong in the video is the conclusion. So how is that possible? How could the logical proceeding of an idea be correct every single step, but then the last step, the conclusion step, is wrong? Well, it's because I committed the classic mistake that pretty much everyone commits on YouTube Fitness when they're wrong about a lift, which is that I relied too much on theory and not enough on practice. Because in theory, the incline curl should be a bad lift. You have a momentum-dependent lift, so tendency to cheat, tendency to not control the negative, risk of injury. It has a horrible strength curve, meaning that it is extremely difficult to grind. You have a tendency to die on the lift. And it's also notoriously difficult to progress on. So many people do their incline curls with 30 pounds. A year later, they're still using 30 pounds. They cannot add reps and they cannot add weight. The issue is that these things are effectively negative aspects of the lift, but there are negative aspects of the lift if you don't know how to use the lift. If you actually do it properly, These are not negatives at all. They're actually the things that make the incline curl so effective. So if we look again at all of the things I just presented, let's look first at the momentum. It's bad because it's reliant on momentum. Okay, great. But as long as you control your negative, that's not a bad thing. Because now the momentum can be turned into an advantage. Now you extend the stretching portion of the lift where the biggest hypertrophic response occurs. And the beautiful thing too is that this bottom of the movement that I shit on in my previous video, where you rebound, sure, it's not great if you use too much shoulder because now you're cheating, quote unquote, but if you do it properly, now it's the bicep doing all of the work. So you get pure stretch reflex solely for the bicep, which is what you tend to look for in a bicep exercise to get maximum hypertrophic response. So that's actually great. As long as you're not an idiot, again, and you don't flail your arms around, or you just don't use improper loads, like I see some people do, you're perfectly fine. All of these aspects of the movement can be corrected if you just use your brain. Then you have the strength curve, which is something you cannot correct because it's part of the lift, okay? That's accurate. Yes, the strength curve is bad. So sometimes with lifts with a bad strength curve, you have a tendency to die. The thing is that if you look at the list I just presented, the GM press is the same. The GM press, done with an SSB, not the Smith, has a horrible strength curve. Usually you press here and you're blocked around here, right? But this is an opportunity to grind. Just because you're stuck here doesn't mean that the lift stops. It stops if you don't know how to grind. And sadly, my past experience with the lift was one where I just couldn't grind. I couldn't figure out how you're supposed to grind the incline curl. And now I know, and I understand why so many people say it's actually not that hard to grind at all. You simply have to make sure that when you get to a 45-degree angle, you're in a position where you didn't commit your elbow all the way up. So if you're here and you're at this point and your elbow is still tucked in and you're supinated, that grind is not going to be that hard. But if you're out of position, it will. And it's not because the grind is impossible, it's because you fucked up the grind, which is something I realized when I started doing incline curls, because I was like, oh, actually, my rep starts too slow at like 6 or 7, but I'm still able to get to 12. And yes, every rep is slower than the last, but never enough to completely kill my set. The thing with that grind too that starts early on in the set is that since you're able to make the grind last at least for half of the set and half of the reps of the set, that's actually very challenging because this is where the muscle has to work the hardest. So you can now actually push the lift super, super hard. And you can also add and slap on another thing that I was wrong about, which is the fact that you can indeed rest on the incline curl. I compared the preacher curl and the incline curl saying, oh, at least with the preacher you can rest at the top. Yeah, with the incline curl as well, you can just stop there. This position with your elbow stacked and your forearm stacked is not fatiguing at all. Catch your breath for 10 or 15 seconds and get another rep. You can squeeze 2-3 additional reps past failure if you use that technique. And after that, drop the dumbbells. The sensation in the bicep I've never felt before. The only lift that comes close is preacher curl, where it feels like the entirety of the muscle of the bicep is traumatized and you can barely move your arms. Usually when that occurs, month after month after month, even past neurological adaptation, yeah, that's usually the sign that this lift is actually a great fucking lift, which means that I, the person who said that it was a bad lift, was a complete clown. And I wasn't just a clown. I said that the incline curl was C tier. That's not clown, that's the entire fucking circus. The incline curl is not C tier, it's A or S tier at least. So anyone who told me in the past that I was wrong, that I was completely misreading the lift, congratulations, you're right. You are very important because you have something called critical thinking skills and they work perfectly. Please keep applying them. Please keep humbling YouTubers. It is because of people like you that I eventually started thinking to myself, okay, so many people I respect are saying that the incline curl is actually a good lift. So I'm going to assume that I was wrong and I'm going to give it a fair shot. And what did I found? That indeed the incline curl is amazing and I'm going to see great growth from it because I've already started to see my bicep develop in ways I've never seen before, even though I'm already very advanced. If I can learn from my mistakes, then anyone can. And when it comes to things that I learned by actually having proper experience, I found that as long as your rep range on the lift is proper, you should never get to a point where you just die on the lift because A, you'll have proper execution, and B, the load is going to be relevant. So what I usually recommend is 6 to 12 on that lift. And that's simple to double range. It's rare that I recommend that because it's big, but in this case, it's justified because if you're the type who struggles to progress on the incline curl, it's for one of two reasons. One, you don't taste enough intensity on the lift, so you're never able to go up in weight. Or two, you never taste enough volume, so your bicep never gets acclimated to the stretch and the sensation, and you're never able to get enough of a workload to actually progress. So if you choose a 6 to 10, you get both. You get both very good muscle endurance at the top of that range when you'll get between 10 and 12 reps, but you also get a ton of very relevant intensity when you're between 6 and 8 reps at the bottom of the range. So now the transition from one to the other is extremely easy. If you have plateaued on that lift, start using that rep range, I guarantee you it's going to be much easier. And in terms of form technique and hacks that I have for you, I also find that wrist and forearm position is extremely important. Less than elbow position naturally, but still very important if you want to actually fill your biceps. So if you struggle with that, if you feel that the wrist is taking over, I recommend a force grip where you scoop the dumbbell, where you're underneath the dumbbell without wrapping the thumb, which tends to make it easier to lock in your supination. Many people, when they do the incline curl, have a tendency to pronate because it's when they're the strongest at the top. But by doing that, you remove the involvement of the bicep. You cannot pronate with a force grip because it's going to make the dumbbell slip. It's going to be much easier to rotate outside and supinate strongly through your pinky finger, which is where the bicep is going to be forced to actually be involved. Also, please disregard my advice to do your incline curls on the cable station. It's going to be a bitch to set up and it defeats the purpose. It was just my weird attempt to try and fix the strength curve. If you want to do a bicep movement that aligns with the strength curve of a cable station, just do bicep curls instead. It is actually much better, and leave the incline curls alone. Steve Reeves used to do them with dumbbells with a very slight incline. I think that we can trust him when it comes to bicep development. And that is going to conclude this humility session. So if you enjoyed witnessing me eat some humble pie, you can consider donating to the channel or pledging a monthly membership. It is the first link in the description. It's my Ko-fi page. This is the income that allows me to keep making videos for you guys. So it is actually vital and important if you have the ability that you participate. And if you don't and you just want to enjoy free stuff, you can absolutely do it as well. I can't promise I'll always be humble as I was in this video at least, but I can guarantee you that I'll always try to become better, and becoming better is accepting your mistakes. So by doing that, I hope that we can continue improving together as a whole, because the day a man thinks he is done learning is the day he dies. And I think that this mindset needs to be more widespread on YouTube Fitness, and it's something that we, the natural community, need to adopt as a mantra. So in that effort, I would like to put 3 of my colleagues on the spot by asking them to do the exact same thing. Basement bodybuilding, fast lifts, and board only man, I would like you to tell us what you were wrong about in the past, what of your ways you changed, and what you've learned from these mistakes. And that also applies to you in the comments. What stands did you used to have in the past that you realized afterwards were completely stupid and that you had to let go of them if you wanted to grow? I'm actually super interested because maybe some of the things you're going to share, I'm actually still holding tight to my chest, and I would be better off letting go of them because I would grow more. Can't wait to hear what you guys have in store for me, but that is going to be it for today. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.